Rob Reiner's longtime friend finally opened up about the pain behind his son's decision, and that revelation sent shockwaves through Hollywood history. But to understand the emotional weight behind it all, you have to understand the man standing nearby through decades of fame, pressure, and silence, Robert De Niro himself. Robert Anthony De Niro was born on August 17, 1943, in Manhattan, New York City, into a world soaked in creativity and discipline. His parents, Virginia Admiral and Robert De Niro Sr., were respected painters deeply tied to New York's art scene. From day one, art wasn't a hobby in his house. It was survival, identity, and sacrifice. That kind of upbringing teaches you early that passion always comes with a price. Even after his parents separated, De Niro was raised in a bohemian, intellectually curious environment that shaped how he saw people, struggle, and truth. Growing up in Manhattan's Little Italy, he absorbed the raw street energy, the silences, the tension, the unspoken rules. Those rhythms didn't just influence him, they lived inside him. Years later, they would pour straight onto the screen in ways audiences couldn't ignore. By his teenage years, De Niro wasn't dabbling, he was locked in. He trained at elite acting institutions in New York, studying under Stella Adler, who drilled emotional truth and character psychology into her students. Later, he trained with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio, where method acting wasn't just technique, it was obsession. These years carved his legendary approach: total immersion, ruthless preparation, and zero shortcuts. His early film roles in the late 1960s and early 1970s hinted at danger beneath the surface. But everything changed when he teamed up with Martin Scorsese. Their partnership began with Mean Streets in 1973, a gritty, semi-autobiographical look at Italian-American life. De Niro's performance was unpredictable, electric, and real. It didn't feel acted, it felt lived. That momentum exploded with The Godfather Part II in 1974. Playing young Vito Corleone, a role immortalized by Marlon Brando, De Niro barely spoke English on screen. Instead, he relied on silence, posture, and controlled intensity. The result was terrifyingly powerful. That performance earned him his first Academy Award and locked his place among the elite. What truly separated De Niro, though, was his extreme dedication to authenticity. For Taxi Driver in 1976, he got a real taxi license and drove New York streets for months. He didn't pretend to feel isolation, he lived it. His improvised line, "You talking to me," became legendary. That moment wasn't scripted magic, it was psychological exposure. That obsession peaked with Raging Bull in 1980. To portray boxer Jake LaMotta, De Niro trained competitively, then gained over 60 pounds to show physical and moral collapse. The transformation was brutal, raw, and uncomfortable, and that was the point. He earned his second Academy Award and proved he would sacrifice comfort, image, even health for truth. Through the 1980s and 1990s, De Niro delivered relentless classics: Goodfellas, Casino, Cape Fear, the king of comedy. Each role sharpened his reputation. In Goodfellas, 1990, his Jimmy Conway was terrifying not because he shouted, but because he stayed calm. Real danger doesn't need volume. And just when people thought they had him figured out, De Niro flipped the script. In the late 1990s and 2000s, he leaned into comedy with confidence. It wasn't a retreat. It was proof of range. Behind the laughs was still that same intensity, still that discipline, still that pressure that follows legends long after the cameras stop rolling. Films like Analyze This, Meet the Parents, and The Intern pulled back the curtain and showed a lighter, sharper side of Robert De Niro that audiences didn't expect. Instead of brooding silence and menace, he leaned into humor, timing, and self-awareness. It wasn't a downgrade, it was a flex. Only an artist with real authority could mock his own intimidating image without losing respect. That confidence spoke louder than any dramatic monologue ever could. These comedic turns proved something important. De Niro wasn't trapped by his past roles. He controlled them. He understood the myth around his name and flipped it on its head with precision. The laughs worked because they came from truth, not gimmicks. Under the jokes was still that same discipline, still that same intelligence, just aimed in a different direction. Beyond acting, De Niro's impact runs even deeper. As a producer, director, and cultural force, he helped shape modern cinema from the inside. After the September 11th attacks, he co-founded the Tribeca Film Festival, turning grief into purpose. The festival helped revive Lower Manhattan and reminded the city that art can rebuild what tragedy tries to erase. Through Tribeca, De Niro has consistently backed independent filmmakers and fresh voices. He didn't just protect the past, he invested in the future. That commitment kept cinema moving forward instead of stuck repeating itself. It was leadership without noise, influence without ego. As a director, De Niro showed the same care and restraint. A Bronx Tale, 1993, wasn't flashy. It was personal. Rooted in his own upbringing, the film explored loyalty, morality, and quiet turning points that changed lives forever. Every choice felt intentional. It reflected his deep respect for character and consequence, themes that followed him throughout his career. In later years, De Niro remained powerful without trying to be youthful. Performances in Silver Linings Playbook, The Irishman, and Killers of the Flower Moon showed an artist unafraid of aging, regret, and historical reckoning. In The Irishman, digital de-aging allowed him to revisit familiar territory, but the tone was different. This time, the story wasn't about power, it was about cost. Silence hit harder than violence. Off-screen, De Niro's personal life unfolded with the same complexity as his films. His family story came in chapters, each shaped by responsibility and reinvention. In 1976, he married actress and singer Diane Abbott during a major career surge. Amid rising fame, they welcomed their son Raphael, who later chose real estate over acting while staying connected to film. De Niro also adopted Abbott's daughter from a previous marriage, Drina De Niro. That choice spoke volumes. It wasn't about image, it was about commitment. Drina later pursued acting, modeling, and filmmaking, often crediting De Niro for being a steady, present father. Though the marriage ended in 1988, his dedication didn't. He stayed actively involved in his children's lives, offering support without spectacle. In the mid-1990s, he entered another chapter with model and actress Toukie Smith. In 1995, they welcomed twin sons, Julian and Aaron, through IVF and surrogacy, a modern approach to fatherhood that reflected intention and care. Even after that relationship ended, De Niro remained deeply involved, prioritizing privacy and stability over headlines. Then, in 1997, he married philanthropist Grace Hightower, marking yet another reinvention. Through every phase, one thing stayed consistent: his loyalty to family and his refusal to disappear from the lives that mattered most. The union between Robert De Niro and Grace Hightower brought together two strong personalities driven by shared values, ambition, and a serious commitment to family. In 1998, they welcomed their son, Elliot De Niro, a moment that reshaped De Niro's private world in ways far deeper than fame ever could. Later, when De Niro spoke publicly about Elliot being on the autism spectrum, it wasn't for attention, it was advocacy. He used his platform to encourage understanding, empathy, and support, making the conversation more human and less stigmatized. Although De Niro and Hightower separated that same year without immediately finalizing a divorce, their story didn't collapse into silence. In a rare Hollywood twist, the two found their way back to each other. In 2004, they renewed their vows, signaling a rebuilt foundation and a belief in second chances. That decision reflected De Niro's willingness to confront distance, accept growth, and choose connection over ego. It wasn't about headlines, it was about repair. Their family expanded again in 2011 with the birth of their daughter, Helen Grace De Niro, born via surrogate. Becoming a father again in his late 60s wasn't treated lightly. De Niro leaned in with intention, patience, and humility. He has often said fatherhood kept him grounded, reminding him that legacy isn't just what you create on screen, it's who you show up for at home. Taken together, these chapters reveal a man whose private life is layered, evolving, and real. Through marriages, separations, reunions, and raising children across decades, De Niro consistently showed that family, however complex, sits at the center of his identity. Fame never replaced responsibility. That belief was tested deeply following the devastating events surrounding Rob Reiner and his family. In the stunned quiet after authorities responded to a tragic discovery at Reiner's Brentwood home, shock rippled far beyond Los Angeles. Friends and longtime collaborators struggled to process how such loss could exist so close to someone they knew as warm and generous. Among those most affected was De Niro, who later spoke with rare emotional openness. "This wasn't something that came out of nowhere," he said quietly. "People want one moment, one trigger. That's not how it works. These things build, they fracture, they erode." His words weren't about blame, they were about warning signs that often go unseen. On December 14, 2025, a family was shattered. When Reiner's daughter arrived at the home after a missed appointment raised concern, she expected confusion, not tragedy. What she encountered became a life-altering trauma, one no child should ever face. De Niro later reflected, "That image doesn't leave you. It becomes part of you whether you want it or not." As investigators worked to understand the timeline, attention turned to Nick Reiner, who had been living in the home. Friends later described growing instability in recent months. De Niro was careful not to excuse actions, but he spoke honestly about what he believed had been overlooked. "There was pain there," he said. "Deep pain. And when pain is ignored or minimized, it doesn't vanish, it grows." His message was clear without being sensational. This wasn't about fame or spectacle. It was about family, mental health, and the quiet warnings people miss when discomfort feels easier than confrontation. "It turns inward or outward," Robert De Niro said quietly, trying to explain how pressure finds an exit one way or another. That reality came into sharp focus at a Christmas party hosted by Conan O'Brien the night before everything fell apart. What should have been lighthearted celebration instead became a chilling reference point. Witnesses later described Nick as agitated, disruptive, and visibly unsteady. The energy around him was off, enough that people noticed and felt uneasy. When Rob Reiner confronted his son about his behavior, the argument that followed wasn't subtle. Voices rose, heads turned. The tension was thick enough to freeze the room. De Niro later said that moment wasn't just a disagreement, it was years of frustration exploding in public. "Once something like that spills out," he explained, You can't just shove it back inside and pretend it didn't happen. After Romy contacted authorities, her next call spoke volumes. She reached out to Billy Crystal, underscoring how tight Reiner's inner circle truly was. Crystal rushed to the house with his wife without hesitation. That instinctive response showed how deeply Rob was loved by the people closest to him. De Niro described Crystal's reaction as pure heartbreak. "We all felt like we failed him somehow," De Niro admitted. "You look back and ask yourself, what did we miss? What signs did we explain away because it was easier not to deal with them?" That question lingered heavily. Avoidance didn't feel dangerous at the time, until suddenly it was. Nick's arrest later that day marked the legal beginning of a tragedy that had been building emotionally for years. De Niro was deliberate in how he spoke about it. He refused to turn it into spectacle or reduce it to shocking headlines. "This isn't about fame or Hollywood," he said firmly. "It's about a family. It's about mental health. It's about what happens when love and fear sit in the same space for too long." In the days that followed, De Niro urged compassion without denial, accountability without erasing grief. "You can mourn the victims and still ask how things got this far," he said. "If we don't ask that question, we're just setting ourselves up for the next time." For De Niro, losing Rob Reiner wasn't just losing a friend. It was a brutal reminder. Lives filled with laughter, success, and connection can still hide unbearable strain. "We tell ourselves strong people will ask for help," he said softly. "Sometimes they don't, and sometimes by the time they do, it's already too late." If this story made you think, react, or question what we overlook, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories that go beyond the headlines and into the truths people avoid talking about.